So good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this WBCSD webinar on how COVID-19 will change the way we use space. My name is Cristiana Ciaraldi. I'm a built environment manager at WBCSD, and I will be your host this afternoon for me. So for those who are not familiar, WBCSD is a members-led organization that works with its 200 members and partners to accelerate sustainability. We work across the 6 programs on circular economy, cities and mobility, which is the program that I'm part of, climate and energy, food and nature, people, and redefining value. These are our members. So a few logistics information before I hand over to Bill Sisson, our Executive Director of North America. So this session is being recorded, and we will post our recording in our virtual event series webpage in a few days. So all participants are muted, so you're all muted, but we do want this session to be lively and fairly interactive. So if you have questions, you can either use your virtual hand and then we will unmute you, or you can type your question in the chat and we will try to answer to all questions. So if we don't have time, we'll make sure also to reply in written. So we will ensure to avoid all competitively sensitive discussion during this webinar. And now I will hand over to Bill to present our distinguished panelists. Thank you.
Great, Cristiana. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining and taking time out of what I'm sure is your busy days working from home. Some of you maybe have returned back to work, but thanks again for joining us for this hopefully interesting and conceivably important discussion. Before I introduce the panel, I just wanted to make a few remarks about WBCSD's program. We've been involved and have a long history of bringing the business voice of sustainability into our work program at WBCSD on the built environment. Today, independent of COVID and the impacts that it's having, we're really driven by our members towards the need for a decarbonized built environment sector and a sector that is more circular in terms of how it operates. But COVID and the pandemic crisis it's created has really been a wake-up call, I think, not just for all economies, but for those of us that practice in the real estate sector. It's truly changed everything. So as part of our work program at WBCSD, we've worked with our members on 3 COVID projects. One is looking at vital supply chains. One is looking at a return to work where we're focused on employee health, but also the business recovery scenarios that companies and economies are going to go through. And then we're looking at the longer term impacts, which is tied to our work we call our Vision 2050 refresh. Now, the built environment itself is not immune from any of these issues either. There have been substantial supply chain disruptions. Employees more than ever are expecting to return to their offices in a way that they're more safe, clean, protected, and secure. The recovery itself is going to be very varied across the different sectors of the built environment, whether you're in the office sector, the retail sector, the single family home, or even the multifamily home sector. In some way, shape, or form, there are going to be very different scenarios that play out in terms of the return to what might be the new normal. And whether it's a V recovery, a U recovery, or an L recovery, we're going to see different situations play out in terms of how the real estate sector comes back to where it was. And then there's the longer term impacts, which we'll really try to get at today. And through this tremendously expert panel that we've gathered, I think you'll get to hear a number of perspectives on how these professionals see the recovery and then the longer term impacts playing out in terms of what we've just experienced and been through. So let me first introduce our panel, and then we'll have a little bit of an overview discussion about what we see lies ahead. First, I'd like to introduce Elena Mendez, Chief Sustainability Officer at Acciona Infrastructures, Pepe Larroque, for Principal Real Estate firm and part of the firm of Baker and McKenzie law firm, Emmanuel Normand, who's the Vice President of Sustainable Development at Saint-Gobain, Scott Tu, Vice President of Sustainability at Train Technologies, and Ralph Danola, the CEO of the New Buildings Institute. A very distinguished panel, and one that I hope we're able to get quite a bit more insights as to how they see things playing forward in the real estate sector. But first, I'm going to ask Ralph if he would take command of the screen and present us kind of some high-level perspectives now on what he sees going forward in the real estate sector. So Ralph, over to you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much, Christiana and Bill, for the opportunity to present with this excellent panel today. I'm very excited to have this opportunity and look forward to the discussion. So we, in planning this webinar, we discussed having an overview broadly talking about what was happening before March of 2019 March of 2020, and what is happening now and what the future holds. So I'm going to share some perspectives. You know, these are really unprecedented times. I think the dramatic events that are playing out are historic and global in scale and scope. And we don't have a crystal ball about what the future holds. But I believe, and I think what we'll hear in this panel, is that we do have the potential to cast that future through organizations like WBCSD and the organizations that are presenting today, to develop a roadmap to a recovered economy and a decarbonized built environment. And again, you know, I think that we've got you know, three parallel events that are playing out in North America and globally. The call for equity and justice, the pandemic, which has basically led us to leave our buildings and our cities to shelter in place and protect ourselves for health and safety. And then, of course, the climate crisis, which is bigger than all of these things. But you see these three kind of parallel crises playing out, and they're nested and they're connected. But we have an opportunity through the built environment to solve these in the time that is necessary to be successful. So we need to be thinking about these kind of three different social and environmental concerns and economic concerns together and work towards common solutions. So not long ago, 2019, we saw great growth in the real estate sector, 15%, you know, according to CBRE, 15% year-on-year growth, and you know, we had very positive market outcomes up until 2020. We saw growth in jobs in the sorry, excuse me. We saw growth in jobs in renewable energy and in private sector development, and this is all positive, and we know that for instance, renewables, cost of renewables has been parity or lower than fossil fuels. You know, and still in 2019 we were demonstrating globally. 7 million people came out to demonstrate on moving forward with climate initiatives. Led by a 16-year-old Greta Thunberg, really trying to call us to task. So here we are in 2020, and everything has changed since 2019. And again, the future is not necessarily clear, but we see you know, impacts on the real estate sector. We see this playing out in the second quarter, third quarter of this year, and again, a lot of uncertainty. We know that the efficiency sector has been hit pretty dramatically. I think the statistic is 3 million jobs globally, about almost 500,000 jobs in the US, and a call for economic recovery and stimulus Recently released the International Energy Agency calling for at least $3 trillion in investment to create 9 million jobs, and also doing this in the face of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The WRI has called on Building Back Better, investing stimulus funds in the building sector, in smart grids, in transportation, in agriculture to stimulate the economy, to bring jobs back, but all again for a green economy. And we have, with this pandemic, I think, started to look at what our priorities are and where we focus. And I think this has been a centering that has been really valuable for our communities. So what are the opportunities for transformation? Certainly the one that's front and center for all of us here on this webinar, really transforming the office environment and the challenges that we have. That this picture, to some of you, may feel uncomfortable because of proximity of the folks working here. So we really have to reinvent our office space. And so there's been a lot of work done recently about the biological effects. The University of Oregon, the Center for the Built Environment, focusing on microbial transmission of disease and what the solutions are. You know, a lot of organizations, ASHRAE, AIA, US Green Building Council, organizations like CBRE, architecture firms, engineering firms are all coming forward with solutions for the existing built environment and for new construction as well. And people do want to come back to work, as Bill was saying. Many people want to be back in the office environment and collaborating, while still maintaining some connection to the home office environment. And so solutions are being offered, either changing space planning, updating HVAC systems. So Scott will talk about that later. And then, how does this change our lease agreements with landlords? And the other thing that is an opportunity for transformation that is playing out across, I think across the US and across the globe, is looking at policy. And so jurisdictions that are regulating buildings are looking at comprehensive policies for the built environment that are looking at zero energy, zero carbon buildings, new and existing. And so this is something we really need to pay attention to and focus on. And most recently, a call for grid integration and electrification of buildings. And this is an opportunity for an equitable built environment. So thinking about how we integrate equity into our work on how we build, design, build, operate, and renovate buildings. And so, the opportunity for transforming our built environment, our cities, our buildings is really in front of us, and we can really reshape our built environment to make sure that we are addressing those three concerns of equity, of economy, and environment as well. So it might be some time before we are all gathered together in public spaces, in office environments, but we can have that vision for the future when we have a vaccine and we can return to a new normal. But what we see playing out with the response to this pandemic is really people rethinking the way we commute, the way we occupy our homes, our offices, and taking back the streets. So a movement to move towards a more integrated community and rethinking the way we get to work and the way we do our work. So that's the nature of this discussion for this panel. We have been working with organizations like AIA, ASHRAE, USGBC, ULI, WBCSD to gather resources. So we have a resources page related to COVID-19 that we would welcome you to visit. And we would also welcome you to join us at the Getting to Zero Forum, which is planned for New York in next spring, March 2021, March 15th to the 17th. So look forward to the discussion, and thank you again, Christiana and Bill, and look forward to the other panelists. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thank you so much, Ralph, for setting the tone. I think we're going to go on, the full screen now. It's interesting. Scott too and I were having a recent discussion, and Scott, sorry for stealing anything you might have wanted to say, but I know when we left our offices in the early part of March, neither one of us thought in our wildest dreams that we'd still be sitting in our homes at the end of June, still trying to deal with and get our arms around exactly what's going on. And it really has changed the way we think about space. We think about being in the office. We think about going to the office. There's a lot of factors that can either work for us in the context of how we come out of this in a better way, or can work against us in terms of the impacts that a changed set of behaviors might have on things like climate change due to the built environment and how we think about it going forward. But before we get into those nuances, because I'm sure some of my distinguished panelists would like to talk about that, I wanted to ask Pepe if you could share some perspectives. As a principal in real estate for Baker McKenzie, I'm envisioning you're getting quite a bit of inquiries these days about lease structures and safety measures and what demands they can place on landlords and tenants. So how about taking us through your world for a few moments, Pepe, and sharing some experiences and insights. Over to you.
Thank you, Bill. So I guess legally there are a multitude of angles where you come at this, and from the beginning, I guess the first things that we have to deal with is just the practical sense of what's going on around you, but also dealing with the mandates that are issued by the different government authorities throughout the world. And those are distinguishing between those that can continue to work because they're considered as essential and non-essential. And those are kind of all over the map. In some places, manufacturing is essential. In some places, it is not. In some places, certain professions, certainly the medical one, is, and in retail, if you're selling groceries, et cetera. So you have to deal with that as a tenant. So that's a big set of consultations that come into a firm like Baker McKenzie, literally throughout the world. Then there's an issue that you deal with that goes into liquidity. And how do I pay the rent if I'm not having any income, or if my space that I lease, I do not have access to it. And then the flip side to that is, if I don't pay the rent, what are the issues liquidity-wise that it presents for an institutional investor that holds many properties that, for example, are retail or office? The issue then kind of turns into, are we in a situation of force majeure? What does my lease say? What am I going to do? Do I have any right to an abatement of rent? Enter, in addition to that, different governments that within a country go from the local or municipal to state and federal level, and they come out issuing their regulations, some saying, yes, you are in a situation and there should be an abatement of rent. Others being silent within the same country, even sometimes within the same state. So you have to kind of sort through all of these different issues. And then you get to the point where people begin to analyze how their footprint is going to be during the period and after COVID. And am I going to use as much space? We have several instances where we are working with clients that have a significant, I'd say 100+ jurisdiction footprint. And when we see those situations, we engage with them and try to figure out a plan, because clearly, although today there is no particular issue with that as to how their footprint will continue, in the future, as supply lines are changing, some because of COVID-related issues, some because of simple trade agreements, that is going to bring them more to nearshoring to their jurisdiction. So what impact is that going to have? So as you can see, that really there are implications all over the map. And what we try to do is sort through them. The one thing that we do recommend when we talk to our clients, whether they are tenants in retail, office, or in manufacturing, logistics, or whether they are landlords, is that there needs to be engagement and see what both are planning to do around this pandemic, because clearly we're all in it together.
Thanks, Pepe. Interesting perspectives for sure, especially in the dynamics of the time. I know we're wanting to pivot a little bit of the discussion into what lies ahead. I love the phrase that Ralph used in his opening, hindsight is 20/20. And when we think about what will change going forward based on the experiences we're having now, it does lend an interesting sort of context as to what will change. Commuting, for instance, to buildings in cities might be impacted. And I know I was reading a recent Economist article, whereas if 1% of New York City's population decided to switch to single cars to drive to the city, it would increase traffic by 12% in the city. And when you think about that in the context of climate and emissions associated with that 12% increase, it could be a tremendously negative impact. So Scott, I wanted to pivot to you. You must be getting a lot of inquiries these days from the side of your business, which is air conditioning and ventilation, looking for strategies, solutions for cleaning the air, indoor air quality, other factors. But we know sometimes those go at a cost. So curious if you could share a few experiences you're having as a business involved in that transaction, as well as how you're recommending to your clients how to take those solutions forward. So over to you, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And it's great to be here with all the other speakers. And I think this is an important topic. Ralph and Pepe have already done a great job of setting this up for I think a broader discussion that should generate a broader conversation. You're right. I work for a company that's the world's largest producer of HVAC systems, so the air and cooling and ventilation systems for commercial buildings around the world. So if you're in a comfortable space right now, it's highly likely that we may be helping that place be comfortable. I think that this idea of comfort, though, to your point, Bill, has now been attached to something that has been on our minds for a long time, and that's around the health impacts, the quality of the air that we also breathe as we're comfortable. And Ralph used this word rethink, and I love it because I think that this is our moment. If the pandemic has silver linings, and I think all of us are trying to find some silver linings, one silver lining is that we're finally attaching all the things in our rethink of what's happening and where do we go from here. We're rethinking this concept of comfort and its connection to health, as well as energy. Now, for a long time, we've been focused as a company, and maybe many of you have been concerned about the amount of energy that's consumed by ventilation systems and comfort systems in buildings. You know, there's a prediction by McKinsey that between now and 2030, 1 billion new air conditioning systems will be installed around the world. There's a big concern of ours as a company that the world really can't take on that much energy load unless we change the energy supply side and unless we do something about the efficiency, installation, and operation of those systems. So we've been working on that in hand with organizations like WBCSD and many others. Now this pandemic has attached another element to our concerns and to something we all have to work on together, and that's the health impacts. So many of our systems today that are not designed well, that are not operating well, there are some concerns that there's a few things that are not being done well either that may impact our health. Things such as improper cleaning of filters that could actually prevent or help with things like virus transmission. And then secondly is the amount of outdoor air that's brought into the building. We all know that the outdoors right now is probably the healthiest place for us all to be as long as we're social distancing. But we have the same concerns inside of a building. We need more outdoor air. And in some countries, some buildings, some campuses, We're not mixing in enough outdoor air. So those two simple elements need to be part of our considerations as we think about going back to the office at some point in the future. But I think the bigger thing is what Ralph mentioned, this whole rethinking. We can't afford to go forward attacking just the energy issues around buildings, and we can't afford just to go and look at the health impacts of systems in our buildings on our health. We have to attack all of this at a systems level. It all needs to be done in a lockstep fashion so that we do not sacrifice one for the other. I think all of us would agree that with all the work around climate change and around the issues of energy use, making the world more efficient, reducing carbon footprint, we cannot afford to sacrifice all of our efforts and progress in that arena with the health side. Likewise, we can't just attack the energy side and the carbon footprint side and not do something about the health impacts of buildings. And so we're going to have to treat this, view this, and design a fix for all this at a systems level. And there's a lot of levers that we can pull to do that. But now more than ever, we've got to think about all of this at a systems level, because the solutions are going to happen at a systems level, and the biggest and best impacts, the positive impacts, will happen at a systems level. So I'll stop there. Maybe there are questions later.
Great, Scott. Thanks a lot. We know the built environment sector, the real estate sector, is very complex in terms of how transactions kind of manage through to the end product. And so these decisions, are often based on trade-offs or engineering rethinks or what have you. But I think you're right, Scott. I think the demand side of this problem is going to be increasingly felt by the supply side, if you will. And
Right.
People are for sure going to expect much more robust environments in which they're operating today. There's a heightened level of consciousness and awareness. Let me pivot to Elena. I think, Elena, about a month ago, I got the benefit of listening in on a Counselor of Real Estate webinar on how different sectors of the built environment, so whether it's retail, commercial office, warehousing, what have you, they're all going to come back at different rates of recovery. So I would imagine the construction industry is really paying close attention to demand for your services, and wanted to get you to share a few perspectives, not just on the sector itself, but perhaps even a little bit of what's happening in Europe as you see it from your perspective. So over to you, Elena, to give us a bit of a perspective on the construction side of the business.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon to you all, and thanks for the invitation to participate in this talk. About the construction and infrastructure's perspective possible, we need to make the first question if will continue climate change and sustainable development goals in the center of the economic and social political agenda as it was going in the last years, because probably it's possible to make a translation to economic and social pandemic challenge because they are not really different to those needed to give a response to go on with social and climatic challenge ongoing in the pre-COVID scenarios. So from our point of view, the future economic recovery period could be an opportunity to have healthier economics, but for that purpose is needed to introduce from the design stage of every policy to refer to the use of the space, the human scale, and of course environmental challenge that would be placed in the center of the design of those development policies. Following that perspective will be, with no doubt, an opportunity to construction and infrastructure sector, but quick and decided action will change that challenges into real opportunities only if we are able to make an evolution of the actual industrial sector into a quite different and new one. Nowadays, and very close, even facing already the pandemic, financial market shows some interesting trends. There is a recent report of Credit Suisse called Super Trends. And this report in its last edition gives an interesting overview on the economic trends after the pandemic. That starts on the basis that governments and companies will need to carry out large-scale upgrades to infrastructures, and also with the premise that after the deceleration of human activity, the decrease of pollutants strongly shows the link between activity and climate change. Not in vain, climate change concerns are creating powerful regulatory and political booster within the infrastructure sector. So there is a clear call from the markets to seek through companies working in the field of sustainable as greater warranty of stable and long-term investments. And also, as an additional remark, I want to emphasize that public and private cooperation for infrastructure investment will be needed because all the public expenditure done due the pandemic response will be translated in a weaker investment capacity for public sector, even affording new and important necessities related to those infrastructures. But public administration won't fulfill the gap of new investment needed. So it's need to analyze the cooperation between public and private sector to combat this deficiency in a scenario of limited resources, less liquidity and high demand. Acciona, as a construction company, has participated recently in several international forums to analyze and give opinion about the post-COVID scenarios. And we strongly believe that we need to make a call to governments to prioritize those investment plans that implies a contribution and an acceleration to the decarbonization process. We also push for more strict regulation for all those topics linked to ambitious sustainability goals. Again, won't be a problem of experience, knowledge, or technology. It's a problem of compromise, intention, and direction. Previous crisis in 28 with a very different origin, basically in the financial system. We have come with short-term recovery solutions, and now we think it's mandatory to align solutions with climate change agenda and Sustainable Development Goals agenda. Just as a short example of this, recently our government in Spain, and trying to give a response to the difficult situation of the automotive sector, have given some subsidies for car acquisitions. Now you can have economic help to buy a car, and that help will be bigger if this car is an efficient one. But probably it's not a question to subsidize more the energy efficiency and less the others. The point is to decide focus investment in the strategic sectors for the decarbonized and sustainable economy, and to penalize and progressively renounce to the production and acquisition of those goods that do not contribute to a fair and balanced transition in response to the climatic emergency or the new social situation. I just want to finish to put a focus in the concept of social infrastructure that will be very important in the near future. All infrastructures have a social function, but social infrastructures are those referred to health, education, environment, water, and those crucial for economical activity, productivity, and social welfare. We could define them as the structures necessary for a society to function properly, from school, hospitals, prisons, transport networks as roads or rail lines. Pandemic impact have evidenced the need of investment in most of those social infrastructures and as a priority as the healthcare ones. So the focus should be put in this kind of infrastructures in the near future.
Great, thanks, Elena. It's really amazing to me the level of visibility that sustainability has maintained through the course of this COVID crisis. And it's true that many governments are setting up their stimulus programs with the condition of sustainability attached to them. We're seeing this in Europe, obviously, in Canada, and other economies around the world. So I think that's a testimony to what you're saying, in that we have an opportunity now to, build back better. Let's use that moment that we're in now to not only build back better, to build back with much of the experiences that we've now gone through in mind, because frankly, the situation we've just been through, or we're going through now, is really a test drive for our future. There's going to be increased events, disruptions, macro trends that are going to create tensions for the business community and the built environment sector to navigate. So I think that's something that, again, I love this phrase, hindsight is 20/20. We really do have a hindsight moment to take advantage of here, to think about the best way forward. And I know, Emmanuel, it goes without saying that you might have a few thoughts and opinions on what lies ahead for us from Saint-Gobain's perspective, but also from your own. So how about sharing with us a few of your maybe perspectives that Saint-Gobain is looking at the moment, and then how you think the way forward is going to look. So over to you, Emmanuel.
Thanks, Bill, and be with you. I would like to start with a personal perspective. I'm currently speaking from my office. It happens that this office is not the office that I had before the confinement. We were supposed to move from an old headquarters to a new headquarters. So before the confinement, I left my old headquarters, and now I'm in my new headquarters. And this new headquarters was designed to be fully open space, fully flex office, fully designed for collaboration. And question, obviously, is it still accurate in the new environment to be in this new, very nice headquarters, but which is very much designed somehow in a thinking of the old world? How could be the new world related to that environment? And coming from there, what are my thoughts in general? First, I don't think that we will go on business as usual. There will be some dramatic changes, and we are ongoing some dramatic changes. On the contrary, I don't think also that those changes will be such that, for example, we will be tomorrow 100% home office for every type of company. It will be a kind of mixture. It will be a mixture that will lead to the fact that when you are looking at your home will be something else than just a place where you sleep, or you have dinner with your family, or you have a bit of leisure. It will need to be a place where you will have the opportunity to work. You will have the opportunity to have schooling for your kids. You will have the opportunity to have multiple generations that will be in your home when you see what has been the consequence of the COVID on nursery homes. When you're looking at your office, it will not be an office business as usual, where you come every morning up to the end of the day, be in your office, have a bit of interaction with your people. It will be probably more the area where you go when you need collaboration, when you need to do some things that you cannot do on your own, in your home, because you need to be much more in a collaborative mode. In that sense, the way our headquarters has been designed is very much following this approach. And you will avoid, as it has been said, commuting just for commuting. I've been very impressed by my colleagues in Asia explaining that Indian people has discovered that they were able to gain in comfort and in health and in less stress just because they had much less commuting thanks to the confinement. So when you go to the office, it will really to be in an environment which needs to be a collaborative environment, and offices that will need to be designed with that respect. Same story around commercial spaces and public spaces. The question of crowding of people, too many people at the same space, may evolve due to the COVID. So what does it mean for a solution provider as Saint-Gobain? First, we believe that the need for comfort, health, and well-being your home, health will be significant this crisis. To continue to build on a living environment that needs to be much healthier. Second main element is that idea of modularity and flexibility. You design a home, you design an office, which is not for single use. It's a home or office that is multi-use, that is able to evolve, in a short period of time or a longer period of time. And so all this idea of modularity, flexibility, with the significant consequences that you can have in terms of impact on the resources and circular economy, all this thinking around the fact to be able to use better a space and as such to reduce the intensity of resources will be significantly accelerated by that crisis. And obviously, and it has been said again, reinforcing even more the need for very energy efficient buildings and decarbonized buildings. A key topic of the current stimulus packages in a number of countries, and in particular in Europe, is to take the opportunity of this crisis and the recovery packages that will be built up to significantly accelerate the transformation of the building stock towards much more efficient building stock. Because energy efficiency is not only contributive to climate change, it's contributing to health and well-being and globally to comfort. So beyond all those questions which are related to the building, it's really how the buildings is interacting with the city and how you redesign the city, a city probably which is much more inclusive, much more providing services of proximity, different than a city where you have in some places office spaces, in other places living spaces, commercial spaces, some things that allows to have a set of services and providing a range of inclusivity that will be probably enhanced to middle cities as we see them in France, that are providing a quality of life and a quality of services that big city or full rural areas are not able to provide.
Great, thanks.
That is what I wanted to share with you, and I'm happy for some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Emmanuel. And it's really an important set of perspectives you provide. As I think we all, it's interesting. You're with us from office space, which was probably entirely designed with a different situation in mind. So. And a lot of that's going to put pressure on the industry to change. But Roland has actually posed a really interesting question, and I said, let me Ralph to give his perspective, and then I'll open the floor to all of you to share your thoughts. Ralph, Roland writes, is the construction industry that is generally quite tech and low margin ready to adapt such change to more modularity and more healthy buildings? What needs to change? So Ralph, I'll start with you.
What to change? That's an excellent question, Roland. Thank you. And it's one that probably requires a lot more time than we have. I would just say, I think the signs of what I'm optimistic about, I think that the policies are really driving these changes in the building sector, and I think now there's going to be an acceleration. I think that Emmanuel shared that. The policies that are moving towards, finally we're connecting climate goals and building policies like energy codes and private sector companies understanding that they have, buildings, globally nearly 40% of carbon emissions. So now what we're starting to do with the policies and the requirements, for instance, Local Law 97 in New York City requiring building owners to start reducing carbon emissions from buildings. That means, one, we have to understand how our buildings perform. We need to basically be able to do the analysis, and we have to understand how we decarbonize them. And we also now are thinking about building grid integration and connectivity. So I think that requires some technical capability, and I think it's promising that companies like Microsoft, Google, and others are starting to get into building systems and controls and automation. So we need to be much more tech savvy in the building sector, both in terms of systems and equipment that are connected to the internet and to the grid, and that we're basically having buildings that respond to signals either for demand response or even more importantly time of use to reduce carbon emissions. And then I think, as Scott was saying, HVAC systems that are smart and sense occupancy. We didn't even talk about things like moving towards dedicated outside air systems and energy recovery ventilation, heat recovery ventilation. There's this need for much more integrated HVAC and building systems and components. And one promising thing that I've seen, and I think we'll see more of, is passive house as a standard being integrated into these policies. And so, better envelopes, better ventilation, and better health outcomes because of dedicated outside air and heat recovery.
Great, thanks, Ralph. Any, Scott, Emmanuel, any reactions to the question?
Well,
I may have a reaction.
Let me be a good moderator. We'll have Scott go first. Scott?
Okay.
Yeah, just a couple of things. I think that the low tech, it's right. One of our issues in learnings of the past and our focus on making buildings more energy efficient was a need to move from low tech to a more high tech, more sophisticated approach that Ralph just mentioned. More sensors, more automatic decisions being made, more building controls at a macro level. And that all of that is what leads to a more efficient buildings. We're going to see exactly the same thing on buildings that are healthy buildings, which in the future we may call smart buildings, which are both healthy and efficient. But it does require much more technology, a lot more automating, and that will have to be a new normal beyond COVID. There's no doubt about that.
Great, Emmanuel.
Yeah, I mean, the company of the value chain of the built environment are changing if the environment in which they're acting is changing. It's very simple. I mean, if the customer has different requests, the offer will change. If the regulatory environment has different requests, the companies will have to adapt to a new regulatory environment. Depending on which segment you are in the market, the driver is not necessarily the same. It can be regulation, it can be labels, it can be a requirement from customers. It's very depending. It's not the same when you are talking about public buildings, tertiary buildings, commercial spaces, office buildings, residential housing. It's different. But in order to drive the construction industry towards something else, you need to change the perspective in which you're
We'll give him a couple of seconds to unfreeze.
you are working, and that is a different type of offer.
Yeah. Yeah, demand matters, I think, really. And that's going to really set the tone for how quickly the industry is going to respond. I think, as we've talked about throughout the session, there's a much more heightened sense of the occupant in interacting with the building than I think there was 6 months ago. And so that changes the demand profile, I believe. And Pepe, for me, it also introduces maybe a context that you might have a few thoughts on, which is the liability side of this discussion. You know, if buildings are being produced and labeled and offered as more smart, I guess, Scott, to use your term, does that put a conditional liability on the building owner or the building operator? What are your thoughts there?
Yes, it does. It does in the sense that if you're complying with building codes, for example, you actually do. You can't just simply convert yourself into a sustainable space by fiat. You actually have to comply with it. You also have the sort of self-regulatory and being labeled, if you will, by or certified by the different bodies, the international bodies that do this. But yes, you can't misrepresent yourself. And I'd say that it's really an important issue as you're coming back to work. It's front and center with employees. I mean, I know that we look at it from our perspective, and we have a very significant 77 office footprint all around the world. And everyone is really very concerned about their health, whether the HVAC system has sufficient fresh air, et cetera. So you really have to focus on these issues, and they become even more so when it deals with the health and what actions you took, what actions you didn't take. I think there will be demand, and I think that that there is demand currently for going to the space that Emmanuel is in. I know that we are certainly contemplating on it and being much more mobile and agile as to how we use our space. So I think that is going to be a new normal.
Yeah, we historically have used the term split incentive in the tenant occupant relationship, in particularly in energy efficiency. And I think this adds a whole new dimension of split incentive when it comes to safe and secure environments. And so I would imagine from the legal perspective, this is going to make your life quite interesting as the principal for real estate at Baker McKenzie going forward. Elena, just curious, just back to you, maybe your perspectives on this technology question and whether the industry can adapt quick enough to recover better. So what do you think?
I pretty agree with Manuel's intervention. I think we're now facing a moment that the demand or the social expectations and legislation is getting quite close in many aspects, and also the political agenda. And in that sense, with that growth of legislation and demand going through, the market will go on through change more quick than if that without that change.
Right. No, excellent. Right. It's going to be an interesting next year and a half. I think I'm looking at the pre-vaccine, post-vaccine kind of conditional change now, and we're hearing some positive news that maybe late now, 2021, there'll be vaccines that are making their way into the population, the world's population. So we'll see exactly how these questions we're pondering today. Ralph, you have your hand raised, so maybe you want to.
Yeah, I guess, you know, I know we're getting close to the end of the conversation. I just, one of the things we discussed in preparing for this session was kind of how real estate is classified. And, you know, I think most people recognize Class A, Class B, Class C office space, and you know, corporate America, corporate institutions, you know, usually are looking for Class A space. And I think back to when LEED was first emerging and how you know, we were kind of thinking at the time, you know, isn't it going to be interesting if Class A is defined by including a LEED certification at a certain level, for instance, LEED Gold, LEED Platinum. And it kind of, I think, played out that way where, you know, in order to have a Class A building, you would have, or a Class A space, you would have a green, you know, certified green space. And I'm kind of now wondering, and I think, you know, to any of the panelists, you know, does the future include now, you know, a wellness certification, or, you know, to be defined, you know, because I know, you know, International Well Building Institute and Fitwell and others are really looking at, you know, a space that is safer. And, you know, I don't think we can say anything is, you know, definitely safe, but, you know, a safer built environment for occupancy. And I think that, you know, this is a question, is Class A now in this, you know, COVID, you know, and post-COVID world going to be, you know, designed and built and operated to be a healthier, safer space?
Right.
I think that's.
I think we have to move that direction.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we have to move that direction. I think that in the future we're going to move. Well, I think we will move away also from building owner setting all the decisions of buildings to more of an occupant-focused expectation. And if you do that, then Class A would have to consider things like health impacts.
Yep. Yeah. Well, we were going to close the session with one prediction from each of the panelists. So I think if you can give one prediction, we've talked about a lot of them, but what's your sort of crystal ball telling you the post-vaccine world will look like? So I'll start with Ralph very quickly.
So, you know, in my view, you know, the future is ours, right? Like, we have the opportunity to do this and to do it right. So, so my prediction is that we are finally going to bring together the triple bottom line, right, of equity, economy, and environment in how we basically reoccupy our cities, our commercial buildings, and so the opportunity is ours. We know, technically, we know how to do it. I think it's just that we need the kind of commitment of everyone involved. And this is, you know, global universal impact. And so it's an opportunity globally. And so I'd say, you know, in my view, moving forward, what we're going to do is we're going to remake the built environment that's going to address climate and equity
Awesome.
and do this for the economy as well.
Awesome. Very inspiring. Pepe, what do you think?
I think there is engagement, and we'll see engagement. It's not going to be an us versus them, a landlord versus a tenant. I think that we'll work together when we want that Class A building. We want it with the best system of HVAC that there is. That's well for our clients. The well-being is very important. I have a seminar later this morning on well-being, which is front and center as part of what we're doing. So I think we will see that. It's up to us really to keep that engagement going.
Great. Elena.
Well, I will go with a less risky prediction that it's that economic perspective for year 2020 won't be good. But anyway, the perception of the risk and vulnerability in many countries have experienced an important transformation, and that will be a way also to push on significant change to go on through sustainability goals.
Great, great. We're at the top of the hour, so Scott, one word.
One word: equitable access to smart and healthy buildings will be common.
Great, awesome. Emmanuel, final word, if you want it. Okay, so it's the great revelation, the great realization. It's a wonderful skit. You can find it on YouTube. I suggest if you're not familiar with it, go do a Google search on YouTube and find the little skit called The Great Realization. You'll enjoy it. That's my future. Christiana, over back to you, please. You're on mute.
Very quickly, I just wanted to show you these slides to inform you that this is a part of our virtual event series, and we're having another webinar on the 29th on system decarbonization, another one on July 1st on transformative city business partnerships, and we'll also have engagement opportunities and events in the fall, so stay tuned. Stay safe. Thanks a lot. Massive thanks to the panels, massive thanks to the audience, to the team that has helped, the events team, the ICT, and have a great day and a great afternoon, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.